Well, thank you for joining us now. And this is the day we have Mark Riedemann from Where God Weeps and Edward Clancy as well from Aid to the Church in Need. And thank you for both being here today.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
And maybe if you could, Mark, start off by telling us a little bit about the program Where God Weeps.
Sure. Where God Weeps grew out of a realization that we wanted to communicate the situation of the suffering church. We started out, and we are continuing to produce documentaries, but we realized that we wanted to create a format where the voice of the suffering church could be heard, where the bishops, the priests, the missionaries, and the lay people could speak about the situation of the church in their country. And that's how Where God Weeps came about.
And for you, Ed, how did you get involved? Where did Aid to the Church in Need come in, and how has it helped support Where God Weeps?
Well, Mark is able to give a face and a voice to a lot of the people who are on the front lines of the suffering. And Aid to the Church in Need has been a pastoral support agency supporting the suffering church for almost 63 years now. It was born because of a response to Pope Pius's call to help the church in Germany during those suffering times. And now we help the church worldwide in over 100 countries every year, and supports something like 5,000 to 8,000 projects a year.
Now, maybe if you could talk about some of the places where you've been, Mark, maybe and some of the people that you've met in your travels. And
Sure. Well, it's, first of all, I have to say it's been an extraordinary privilege. Not only to see the suffering church, but also to see where the church, the suffering church is Father Wernfrid, the founder of Aid to the Church in Need, said that the suffering church was the elite of the church, that these were the ones to give us an example, to show us how to put our faith in reflection, if you will. And I must say that the privilege of being able to travel to these areas, of being able to go to, for example, northeast India, where there are tribals, where the church is still in a missionary capacity, working with pagans who are learning about Christ for the first time, just above Myanmar and south of China, in this pocket there of India, or going to Brazil and visiting in the Amazon jungle and traveling along. I spent 10 days filming a story with Father Gino, who is an Italian missionary priest working with the Ticuna Indians on the Amazon River. And these kind of stories, you see on one side the suffering church, where the church is struggling to have her voice heard, to be able to help the local people. But at the other side, it was such an education of my own faith to see these people and to say how they live their faith, and again posing the question to me, how am I living my faith, and how this was an example for me. So it's been a great privilege to see the breadth and the universality of the Catholic Church.
maybe, Ed, too, if you could talk about, being involved in a show like Mark's, and maybe some of the other things that you do, and how shows like this are helping to bring the faces of these people to the universal church.
I think I should tell you of a story of a recent contact from a woman from Albania, and that she and her family suffered through the communist persecution, and her parents were killed during the communist takeover of Albania, and her brothers and sisters and her were able to go to Italy and settle there, and now have come to the United States. And because of the airing of a documentary on Albania, a neighbor of hers heard of it, and she told her and asked us to send a copy of the DVD. And she just sent me a letter saying that she's so overjoyed both to hear that the story of Albania is being told today by Aid to the Church in Need, and also that the church is still alive there. Because even though she's here in the United States and able to worship, her roots are back in Albania, and she knows very well the suffering. So stories like that, and people who come in contact with the direct suffering, and through productions that Mark does, we're able to see the people who actually suffered, and hear their stories. And then to hear it now and hear in a woman's voice or in letters, the great joy that they see in just telling the story, that this is something that is really important for us in the United States, who sometimes take for granted our freedoms of worship and of life, that the simplest things are taken away from them.
Maybe if you could go back, Mark, and talk about your involvement and why, how you got involved maybe, and why you decided that this was an important thing to get out and be involved in with Where God Weeps.
I guess, first of all, I would have to say it was God's providence, if you will, that kind of pushed me along. I can't say, I can't take any credit for the fact that I'm doing what I'm doing. I started out in crisis management and media management, and little by little, God knocked me this way and that, and finally I came up to working in Frankfurt, Germany, where we are located. That is the headquarters of Aid to the Church in Need is located there. We have our studios there, and out of this central of Aid to the Church in Need, we assess the priority countries that are most in need. For example, this year we want to do a series on the situation of the Catholic Church in Sudan, and so we've got a team there now, and we're doing a production series on. One example that comes to mind is a program called Save the Savable, and it's a project that is encouraged by the Cardinal of Sudan because around Khartoum, during the war, the Christians, of course, were in the south, and the Islam in the northern part of the country. And in 2 years' time, I believe, there's going to be the referendum whether to divide Sudan between north and south. But during the war, the Christians, when they were being bombed, they fled to the north, and they stayed around Khartoum because they thought the regime in the north wouldn't bomb their own capital. And so there are a number of refugees around the Khartoum, and the Cardinal said to us, if we don't educate these Christians, if we don't provide education for these young Catholics, in 10 years' time there will be no Catholics anymore in this among these refugees, because they will go to Muslim schools and so on and so on, and soon they'll lose the faith. And so the Cardinal has asked for big support to provide a project called Save the Savable, which is an education providing the construction of Catholic schools and supporting Catholic education. And we thought, there's a story. We go in with a very small team. We have to take great care, of course, because often when we're talking about the situation of the suffering and the persecuted church, the local government, for example, in Myanmar or in Sudan in this case, they don't want to know that you're there to draw out the story and communicate the story of the suffering Christians in their own country, because they say there is no suffering in our country. And so it's a delicate situation. So we often have to go in a hidden way, if you will, and bring the story out and communicate that story. So, and this way, our hope is to I always say I intend to evangelize. I want the stories to evangelize. I want the stories to provide a solidarity with the suffering church, and then I want that these stories should raise an awareness among the viewers that these are our brothers and sisters in Christ. What are we doing to help them? And what is our responsibility as Christians to our brothers and sisters in the universal church? And if we can have achieved these aims, then I think we've done our work.
That's great. And just quickly, before we go, tell people where they can find out more about Aid to the Church in Need.
Well, the best way would be to go to the website, which is www.churchinneed.org. And on that you would see some of the work, and there are press clippings of things that are happening now, as well as connections to some of the productions.
Excellent. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Mark, for being here today.
Thank you, and you're welcome.
And we're going to turn you back to the rest of This Is the Day.